And then they're gonna help review the report, because they're saying, we wanna make sure that we're amplifying the good things and showing the solutions for the challenge.
Hopefully, I'm heard on Zoom, but welcome everyone to our nonprofit training this morning with Cynthia Keaton.
I told him, I said.
I'm Odie Monde, the manager of nonprofit services here at the Community Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today. This meeting will be recorded and we'll get you the information afterwards so that you have it for your knowledge and use after the fact. But I am happy to introduce Cynthia this morning. She has over 20 years of human resources leadership experience in multiple private and public organizations. Her experience ranges from startups to Fortune 500 companies. Cynthia has served as vice president of HR for 2 years for the largest heavy equipment dealers in the U.S. and for a life sciences company that relocated its manufacturing and distribution operations from the West Coast to the East Coast. Cynthia owns Keaton HR LLC, which provides HR compliance audits, succession planning, management training and development, and support for HR projects. Prior to starting her own firm, Cynthia worked for an HR consulting firm, providing support for multiple nonprofit organizations. Happy to pass the mic over to Cynthia.
Thank you. I didn't know we were might be today. That's right. That's right. So I know this is not the most exciting topic to cover first thing in the morning is handbook mastery, but I can tell you that if you don't have a handbook or you don't have a compliant one, you're definitely not alone. Because every single organization that I have gone into, private, public, nonprofit, has not had a compliant handbook. Okay. So when I first started there, that was where we started. Our process was doing HR compliance audit that included the handbook. I'm going to go through a lot of information today. As Odie said, you're going to receive the presentation after. I will break during different sessions to ask you if you have any questions about anything I've covered. And then I'll have, if you want to ask questions at the end, that's fine. There's my contact information. If there's something you think of after you leave here, I wish I'd asked that, feel free. I've probably written 15, 20 handbooks in my life, maybe more. I lost track. So anyway, I'm going to try to share with you what I've learned, and I think it's the most important things to know about a handbook, how to go about it. Right. So first of all, I definitely want to reinforce the importance of the employee handbook because a lot of times when I've gone in an organization, it's like an afterthought. It's like something I have to do, put it on my to-do list. I'll get to it when I can, and that someday never comes. So that's really not a good habit for employee handbooks. So I'll talk about why it's so important to have one. There is a difference between an employee handbook and a policies and procedures manual. There's different audiences for it. They look different. They're made differently. So I want to point that out because I've seen that also be confused. We're going to talk to you about how do I go about creating a handbook if I don't have one? What steps do I take? What do I include in it? And then also, what in Florida is unique from other states that you want to make sure you cover. So first of all, I want to talk about why are handbooks important. There are many, many reasons why handbooks are important. They should be a very easy, good morning. They should be a very easy reference for employees for policies and procedures. I have seen them written by lawyers where you could never understand exactly what this handbook said as an employee or a manager. Like it takes deciphering. That is not the purpose of a handbook. It should be an easy to understand by anyone. I would write it at a lower level, grade level than you think your employees are, just to make sure when they read it, they know what they're reading. It does help them understand, as new employees especially, what are the expectations of myself as an employee at this company? Because they do vary, nonprofits have different expectations than private often. Public have different expectations. The handbook is the place to outline them. And then it does help create a structured, fair, equitable environment. Because what you really need to do is make sure your supervisors know the handbook like the back of their hand. I like to have sessions where supervisors get together and talk about issues they've had with different parts of the handbook. how they've interpreted to make sure it's consistent. Because the last thing you want is a supervisor over here interpreting it one way to the detriment of an employee than this other supervisor over here. So having them talk about that and have them have training on this, make sure it doesn't happen, okay? And it does introduce your culture. Culture's everything, right? That's what they say. This is a good place, including your onboarding training, of course, to help people understand what is this culture and what are my expectations to be a part of this culture. What are the mission, vision, and values of my organization? That should be an introductory part of the handbook. And, I'll go over that, but the last thing you want is somebody coming on board and not really knowing what your mission, your vision, and your values are. They should be able to recite those. When you walk up to any employee, you should say, hey, what is my mission? What is our mission? What are our values? And if they can't do that, they're not making decisions in the best light for your organization because they don't understand them. That is really key right up front and should be covered in the handbook. And lastly, and really hugely importantly, is your legal protection. So as an HR person, my job is litigation avoidance. I know that sounds terrible and everybody thinks that people are, you're an HR freak because you love people, and you do, but you also are responsible for making sure your organization does not get sued. And one of the ways you do that is by having a handbook that it reflects your current policies and procedures that you know and have evidence that employees have read. So this is a really important part for a handbook. You also want very clear guidelines about performance, behavior, and also employee rights. What are their rights and responsibilities as an employee in your organization? And what are my responsibilities around safety, around timekeeping, around reporting? There are very specific things that employees are expected to do that vary by organization. And if you don't tell them and train them and have an easy reference for them, they're going to do it like they used to do it at another place and think they're doing it correctly. So this is a way to ensure that they're doing things the correct way. You also want to share your compensation practices. So I worked for a very large nonprofit consulting with them, and their belief was they wanted to pay at the 65th percentile of the market of their competitors. Who else people would go for? They wanted that compensation philosophy outlined in their handbook. They wanted that to be known to employees. You may or may not want to do that, but they chose to do that. Also, this is a huge miss, I think, for a lot of organizations, is showcase your employee benefits. What I have found in nonprofits in general, the ones that I've worked with, their benefits are far superior than private organizations, and their compensation may not be, their salaries, but their benefits are often much better. If you're in that fortunate situation, employees need to know what those benefits are. It is a retention tool. So if you don't take advantage of that and really make sure they know what the value of this is to them, you're missing an opportunity to keep your good people. So the handbook is a place to explain all of that. And you also have regulatory requirements. You may be subject to FMLA. You may be subject to COBRA. There is USERRA for veterans' rights. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are all these things that you are responsible for as an employer, profit as an employer, right? That you need to explain to employees because they don't know these things. But you are obligated as an employer to educate them on their rights. And those are some of their rights. Also, it is a good reference for people as to where they should go to get help. So I always like to see, for payroll issues, contact this person. For benefits and information, contact this person. For employee assistance, for mental health resources, go here. So it should be a really good reference for employees on how to get help. Otherwise, they're going to spend a lot of time asking around, where do I go for what? And that's frustrating for people. Really frustrating, especially when they need help right away. So you want to make sure you cover that in your handbook. All right. Also, again, it's consistency. If you have an HR person, that is someone who can help ensure consistency, but it is always better to make sure your supervisors are your source of consistency. and they understand how to do that. It does make litigation less likely. Because the last thing you want is one employee over here getting disciplined at, say, a written warning for something, and somebody over here just got a verbal discussion, and those two talk. Because employees have the right, under the National Labor Relations Act, to talk about all terms and conditions of employees of employment. They can talk about their salary, their benefits, how they were treated. They have the right to do that. So if you're inconsistent when they talk to each other, then that can get you in some issues. So just want to make sure you use the handbook as a tool to make sure the consistency is there. And again, if you are sued, right, or you have an EEOC action against you, whatever, it's the first thing an attorney is going to ask for. So if you're going to have to hire an attorney, unfortunately, in that particular situation, they will ask you, first of all, give me the handbook and show me the person signed it, that they acknowledge that they received it. And if you can't do that, then that's going to be to your detriment. So you always want to make sure you can produce that right away. And it does show that you've given reasonable care to your employees, which is a standard that the courts look to. I have reasonably followed my policies and procedures. I have reasonably cared for this employee. And I say here, an out-of-date handbook is as risky, if not riskier, than having no handbook. So you want to make sure you have it and you have a current handbook. The employment laws are constantly changing. We're becoming a more litigious society, of course, everybody knows that. But the laws change. There's also case law. There are cases that are tried all the time related to employees that then set new precedents. So if you're not staying up to date on that kind of thing, then your handbook could be out of date. With COVID came a lot of changes, right? So some organizations never had telecommuting policies before, right? They made everybody come in the office. You couldn't work from home, or if you did, you had to get special permission. Well, the world changed, right, for most people. So your handbook should have been updated to say telecommuting is allowed, and it will be allowed until management, changes the policy and people have to come back in, right? So that required some updating just to make sure that people understood this may not be forever. This is just for right now. Also, if you have employees in more than one state, you have to have a handbook that reflects all states that they're in. I have been in situations where we actually have separate handbooks for employees in different states. California, we were just talking about California. Oh, if you're unfortunate enough to have employees in California, that is a very different state, all kinds of different laws that they don't have in other states. So we had a separate handbook at one of my companies for employees in California. Because honestly, if employees in South Carolina had seen what advantages employees in California received, they may want to move to California. So we were kind of like, oh, do we really want everybody to know that we're required to do this? The other choice is your policies have to be the most generous to reflect everybody. So that California, they have what they're supposed to have, and then the other states, their employees get advantages because now they can have that too. So it's just however you want to deal with that. And if you can't prove that an employee received a handbook, it's as if you never sent it to them. So I've had companies say, well, I emailed the handbook to people. Prove it, prove they got it, prove they opened it, prove they read it. You have to have an acknowledgement that says, yes, I received the handbook, and yes, I signed it, I understand it, etc. We'll talk more about that, but just know, yeah, if you have a handbook, you need to be able to prove that people saw it and read it. What are the risks of not having a handbook? Because I do like to talk about this. So you probably can infer from what I've been saying before, you'll have inconsistent policy application if you don't, because people are just making up rules as they think they should, right? They don't have any guidance, so they're just creating whatever they think is fair. You do have legal vulnerabilities because you can't prove that you're compliant with labor law, like your intent is to comply. So they're assuming that maybe you're not. Poor communication because the policies are unclear or not communicated, and increased turnover could result because people are unclear about their rules or their expectations. So this is another thing I've seen a lot, okay? And maybe this is something you do, but you have a handbook, but then you change a policy or you add a policy and you're like, okay, well, we'll add this later, right? So then you've got a policy that you email out to everybody and maybe some people read it. Most people probably don't because people hate this kind of stuff. And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna discipline this person under this new policy. But they're saying, I don't even know what you're talking about. The handbook says this. So which one is right? Is it that policy you just created that you emailed to people? Or is it the handbook? Well, the court's gonna say it's the most generous towards the employee. That is in effect, not the thing that you just created that's not part of your handbook. So a lot of companies do that. I mean, big companies do that. Like I said, I've worked for some big companies and they have a tendency to do that. So that's really bad practice and that can get you in a lot of trouble. So you should have a standard, update your handbook, send it to people and say, please note on page X, this policy has now changed. Please sign that you've received it, you acknowledge that you have the. Also inefficiency, like I said, employees will spend hours looking for things that they should just find like that. You don't want that. Also, you need really clear expectations around performance. You don't want any kind of conflict resolution because of dispute over policies. You could have potentially a weaker culture because it's not consistently communicated, and you could have onboarding challenges. I have seen people, start. They just get the handbook emailed to them. They don't get it in training, on onboarding training, and they never really look at it. They just click, they signed it. So that's really not a good way to start off with an employee because they've missed so much information about your organization. I always, when I'm designing onboarding training for employees, even if it's only a day, I always make sure there's a piece of the handbook in there, like the most important parts, so that they understand and can ask questions. Okay. Anybody have any questions on like the necessity for a handbook or reasons you should have a handbook? Any? Yes.
Could you apply or should you apply a handbook also to independent contractors?
They should have a separate handbook. I had this very same issue at Chesapeake Bay Outward Bound School. Because they have a lot of independent contractors that do like seasonal work for them. We decided separate handbook. Legally, we reviewed that because otherwise you're acting as if they're employees. But they're not getting all the privileges of employees, right? So everything that you can do to differentiate, one organization that I work with also used the same name for that position. Well, what we did was we changed the name even so that it wasn't reflective of the actual name, so that there was no confusion that this is an actual employee. Because what's going to happen is they're going to be like, well, then they deserve the benefits. I'm following the same handbook. You're calling me the same thing. Why don't I have the benefits that this person has? So this helps you avoid that. Anything else? Okay. All right. Let's talk about some mistakes to avoid. Because I'm always talking about things I've seen because I like to share things that the pain that I went with so you don't go through it, right? So don't use a cookie cutter template for a handbook. Always revise it to your organization. I went into one small business and they had taken another company's handbook and just put their name on it and then sent it out to the employees. I'm like, no. I said, I read individual policies that I knew they didn't do it the same. And I said, do you do it like this? Oh, no. Well, that's what your handbook says. So even if you're going to use somebody else's as a template, make sure you go through everything and change it so that it's reflective of what you want. All policies, like I already said, should be in one place. Don't have this email type thing and have individual policies. Make sure they're all in that one place. And another huge mistake is omitting a disclaimer. Okay, a handbook should say, this is not an employment contract. And employment is at will. All right. The only time employment is not at will is when somebody has an employment contract that says you have duration of employment is X number of years guaranteed. And if not, then you'll get X compensation if we enter employment early. Otherwise, you don't want people to take this to court and say, I had an employment contract. They told me I was going to get a raise this year. And look, I didn't. You want to make sure you put that in your handbook. Okay, not having an effective harassment policy. So sadly, when you're HR, you see lots of different situations with harassment, right? The most important thing is the person to know who they should go talk to if they feel like they're being harassed. And if it's their supervisor, that policy should say, if the person that you are, have a complaint against is a supervisor, then you report to this person. So that they know, because the last thing you want is for them to go get outside counsel because they don't know who to talk to internally in the organization. Okay. Not being concise. That is a huge issue. I have seen a handbook, I kid you not, that was 150 pages. And I'm like, this is not a handbook, this is a textbook, Like, this is not the intent of a handbook. So, and also avoid legalese. Like, your attorney should review, you should have a legal person review your handbook at least once a year, I say, or, as you make changes. At least once a year, but don't let them write it, because they will write it like an attorney and nobody will understand it. I mean, I love attorneys, but.
Developed a safety policy.
Yeah.
Insurance company really wanted a lot of detail, and it's long.
Yes,
I
I would have a safety manual.
So should that be separate
I
from
would have a
the hand?
safety.
Okay.
You
And
can
just have-
reference it in your handbook. Like, the expectations of you as an employee is that you follow the rules and the safety manual. A lot of times what organizations will do is they'll have like a little book that they give people. It's a safety manual that they carry with them. So that when they're out in the field or doing whatever that's unsafe, potentially they can look it up right then. Most people don't have iPads in the field, but I think that's a separate animal. But I would reference it though. Yeah.
And all of those individual policies, drug-free workplace, this and this, put that in the handbook,
Yes.
but then still have them sign a separate page or just sign once for the whole
One
handbook?
for the whole handbook.
Okay.
I would want them to sign the safety manual. And I would want them to sign the handbook. Because what's gonna happen is somebody's gonna do something unsafe. It will happen. And then you want to say, well, you have the handbook and I know that you read it because here's your signature. And if you didn't read it, that's on you because you submitted that you did, right? So you want them to prove that they knew what they were supposed to be doing. Okay, another thing is lack of training, right? That's a huge thing to avoid. Like, don't assume employees are gonna read the handbook. That's a mistake that I made when I first went into HR. Because I was so excited, I would spend hours and hours writing everything, and I would think, well, so everybody's gonna wanna read this. Nobody read it unless I made them read it, right? So don't assume anybody read it. Tell them the most important thing, encourage them to read it. Don't assume that they do. This is another really important thing. The court, I know I hate to talk about going to court, but as an HR person, I'm always looking into the future to see what could potentially happen and how can I keep it from happening. So the court may ask the supervisor, explain that policy to me. And if they can't explain it, the assumption is the employee doesn't understand it. Because if the supervisor doesn't understand it, the employee won't understand it, and they're not going to be held to that standard. The court's not going to rule in your favor in that case. Also, another mistake is never having a lawyer look at your handbook. You didn't, in my opinion, only, okay, I wouldn't pay them to write a handbook because they're going to charge you through the nose. And you don't need that. You can write your own handbook. You just want them to take a glance over and make sure you didn't leave anything out. And then, because that person, presumably, is the person who's going to represent you in court. So if you ever have to go to court, hopefully not, but you want them to know what your handbook says, because they're going to be representing you. Okay. So I'm going to talk now about writing the handbook. Like, how do I go about writing a handbook? Even if I have one, some things to think about. So how do you create a structure for your handbook? All right. So I would say, first of all, you have all the policies that you need. So think through, in your organization, what issues have you seen people confused about? And if there's some practice that people are confused about, maybe it's a good idea to write a policy about it. right? You don't want a policy for everything, but if it's something that people are consistently confused about, you may want that. Always put them in the same format, using the same kind of wording. The reason I say that is I've seen handbooks that were written by 5 different people, and depending on the section, it was a different, like, everything was different. It was bizarre. So it's hard for people to follow that. So always, rewrite it so that it's in a consistent tone. And you don't want it to look like it's been written by multiple. And again, if you write a policy for every situation, it limits your discretion as a management staff, right? So you don't want to tie yourself so down that you have to follow every little thing in the handbook or somebody's got a case against you, right? You want to reserve some judgment for yourself, but you want generally to outline policies, okay? So following are times when you might need a policy that, for example, employee behavior indicates they're confused, like a cell phone use or a travel policy. So I've seen people, there's policies that, okay, you can use your personal cell phone on breaks only. You can use your cell phone for a limited period of time at work. Otherwise, no. So if you have a situation, let's say you're in an open environment with cubes, right? And everybody can hear everything everybody's doing. Do you want to limit the use of personal cell phones? I mean, that's an individual organization's choice, but I've seen that be an issue before. Or travel policy. If somebody's traveling, do they know where they're supposed to stay and how much money they're supposed to spend on a meal? I've seen an employee come back with a $200 dinner, one person. And he said, but there's no policy about how much money I can spend. Well, common sense would tell you don't spend $200 on a meal, right? But he was like, well, I didn't know it was going to be a problem. I mean, he was legitimately saying that because he didn't have a policy. Well, but anyway, things like that. If people don't understand in general how to manage your money correctly, maybe you need a policy. Also, you want an investigations policy in your handbook, like for situations where, let's say you're an organization that when you have an employee investigation, you bring in a third party. You don't do it internally. You want somebody from the outside. You would want to say investigations are handled by a third party, blah, blah, blah. So. All right, if you have a need, you should have an FMLA policy if your organization has a family medical leave requirements. If you have COBRA requirements, which in the state of Florida, sounds like pretty much everybody does, then you should have a COBRA policy. So anything that you're legally required to do as an organization should have a policy. If you have a need for consistent standard and rules, so if you have a discipline policy, then you should have that outlined. Let's say you do step discipline. You do first step is a verbal warning, then a written warning, then a first, second, third, and then it's termination. If you have that, and that's what you always follow, then you want to have it outlined. Always reserving the right to skip steps if you need to. But you want people to understand what does that look like. And then time off policy. Always, if you have, people get so confused about vacation because all organizations handle it differently. Some say you start accruing vacation from day one, but you can't use it for however many days. Or you can only use X number of days at a time. Or you roll over, or you don't roll over. So those are all the specific things that people should know and should be in the handbook. So here's some guidelines on policies. Okay, avoid using words that are so rigid that the organization doesn't have any flexibility. So you want to avoid language that implies that it's a contract with employees. I will always do this. I will always do that. Don't describe employees as permanent. I know that sounds crazy, but in the past, we always said, oh, you're permanent or temporary. Permanent implies they have an employment contract. So you want to say regular. Don't state that employees will only be terminated for cause. The only state in the country that you cannot terminate people for any reason for true is Wisconsin, because after a probationary period in Wisconsin, you have to terminate them for cause. Every other state, unless there's, an employment contract, can pretty much terminate people. Not that you would want to, but you just have to be careful of the wording that you use. Even so much as people now, employment attorneys that I've worked with lately, say, don't use the term probationary employee. Because that implies, once you get through probationary, you're permanent. So they say, oh, you're going through an introductory period. That's how they say that you word it. I give it to lawyers, right? They can figure it out. Okay, so I would recommend using terms like generally, typically, and usually, not always. So another thing that I see is, I don't know if you've ever seen in a handbook where these are zero tolerance. And these things you will immediately be terminated, and there's a list of like 50 things, right? Well, an employee who's terminated is gonna look at that list and go, well, I wasn't on one of those 50, like, you can't terminate me. I'm not on the list. So you don't want to be that specific. You want to say management discretion, right? Okay. This is something that doesn't seem like it's relevant, but to nonprofits, but it really is because it applies to pretty much everybody. It's a recent guideline, and this is an example of how things can happen in a court that apply to organizations, and you kind of need somebody that stays up on top of these things. This is the National Labor Relations Board ruling. Typically, the National Labor Relations Board is unions, but in this case, it's not. In this case, it applies to everybody. It was in August of 23rd, and it's the National Labor Relations Act actually does cover the vast majority of employers of any type in the US. And you have to have, the gist of this case was you have to have documentary evidence as to why it is you put a work rule in place. You can't just arbitrarily create work rules that are going to interfere with an employee's right to engage in concerted and protected activity. And like I said earlier, that means they have the right to talk about what happened at work. They have the right to talk to each other about what happens at work. So they are trying to say, you can't be so overly restrictive in your work rules that there's no real business need for that work rule. Because I have seen some crazy work rules before, and that's what they're looking for. If you're terminating somebody under one of those, they're gonna say, show me that was necessary. Why is it that you had that rule in place? So it's if an employee could reasonably interpret that work rule to have a coercive meaning, then that's gonna be bad for you. It says if they will infer it has a chilling effect on their right to engage in concerted and protected activity. That's a big thing. That's the wording they always used. But what happened is a lot of companies, organizations in the past would say, I'm giving you this 10% increase, but you can't tell anybody. Like, this is between us. You're not allowed to talk to your coworkers about that. You can't do that anymore. You can't do that. So you can't tell people what they can and can't talk about. So here's some examples of things. If you have any kind of policies that relate to any of these things, you can't have them. Talking with coworkers about wages and benefits or other terms and conditions of employment. If they circulate a petition for better work conditions or hours, you can't discipline them for that. They openly talk about pay. If they join with coworkers to talk about problems in the workplace, you can't say they can't do that. If they refuse to work in an unsafe condition, you can't terminate them for that. You can't have any policies around that. These are things that all happened, and that's why this administrative law judge ruled in this case, because those are all the things that were happening out in the work world, and they wanted to make sure that they stopped happening. Yes.
About that previous slide, but if you know what's going on, can you create an opportunity to address it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. This is what I say. It's better late than never to do anything. You know what I mean? It's like you find out, oh gosh, I should have updated this handbook 3 years ago because blah, blah, blah. Well, do it now because you can say, look, I found out about it. I fixed it. You know, I made an effort as soon as I knew. Know better, do better, right? Mm-hmm.
We were given one of those 150-page
Yeah,
handbooks
goodness
that
bless you.
the consultant prepared.
Oh, yeah.
And,
You know why? Because they charge you for that.
yes, every letter. And it doesn't, it talks about second story buildings and we're 1-story building, all kinds of things. But is it better to put some things in place? It's gonna take me a little while to try to craft this. So is it better to put some in place than to have no handbook or?
So it depends on how much you could do. Like if you can't do very much right now, I would just kind of hold off with what you have. But if you can put the shell of one together and get it out,
Yeah.
I would do that because I would send out a handbook and say, okay, we've updated, let's say the vacation policy. We went to certain classes of employees, for example, having unlimited PTO. So that's what we did at a company. We reissued the handbook and said, please note on page whatever, this policy has now changed, please sign that you received this, you know. Hopefully you have an HR system where you can electronically sign, you don't always have to get this on paper. But if you gotta get it on paper, you gotta get it on paper, put it in their HR file. But I think that's a good approach, especially if you know your handbook's not right, you know, and nobody's reading that.
I don't want to read it.
Exactly. If you don't read it, that's a problem.
So are we calling that an addendum to the handbook, or what are we calling it?
You can incorporate a new policy and replace an old policy. That's what I would do. I would take the old policy out, even if you only change like 5 words in the policy, take the old one out, and put the new policy in, with an updated date, you know. Because the last thing you want is to confuse people, because if you've got an addendum and the old things in the body of the handbook, that's confusing.
So we've had a dispute on the vacation time and the other person said, no, we have to redo the whole handbook. And I'm like, it's a year later and we still haven't done the handbook. So
Which is not, I mean, it's really not uncommon. It's not good, obviously, but it's not uncommon. I think if assume it's difficult for people to understand. If you take that approach, and I'm not trying to say people aren't smart, that's not it. It's just they have so many other things to do. The last thing you want to do is try to figure out what the right thing is, right? So just make it easy as possible. And if there's any confusion, take that out. Because you're not helping them, you're hurting them, right? Especially vacation. That's one of the most important things. People work for vacation, especially now, right? So you want that to be accurate, you know, no disputes on that. Anyway, so those are some things that they're trying to protect employees. The Stericycle is the case. That was the company that was doing these things. So. Okay. And it says, if you want to write a work rule, you can keep it if you can prove that it advances a legitimate business interest. So if there's a reason for that work rule that you can prove that's really important, then you're fine. Okay. Some policies that were previously allowed that now you kind of need to take a look at is confidentiality rules, non-disparagement rule, and rules prohibiting outside employment. So that Stericycle case said, if you have these policies, make sure you can explain the legitimate business interest for having them. Because they look at those on a case-by-case basis, especially if you terminated somebody because of one of them. I would review these policies in light of this, your social media policy. A lot of companies say you can't post on social media. Well, you can, but you have to say, this is my opinion as an employee, right? Then you're allowed to post about your organization in general. Restricting negative comments and disparagement of organization's management, products, or services. So I would look at that. And if you have one prohibiting insubordination. So insubordination is not because somebody's asking you to do something unsafe and you refuse to do it, right? So just making sure that, you know, you have policies around that they're legitimate. And sometimes you don't know until you really read your 150 pages what you've got, you know. Also look at your policies related to using tools like Slack and email, limiting recordings of meetings. Okay, so in some states, like Florida, there's like a one-sided agreement. Like one person can say they want to record something and they can. Some states has to have both parties, but some states only one person and they can record it. And restricting meetings with coworkers or circulating petitions and limiting comments to media or government agencies. So you need to look at all those policies and make sure there's legitimate reason for that. Any questions on that? Policies and okay. All right, I'm gonna talk about sections of a policy. If you want to write a policy, these are the recommended things to include in a policy. The purpose statement, and I'm gonna use an example just to make it really clear. So why you're issuing the policy and what is the expected outcome? For example, good grooming and appropriate dress reflect employee pride and inspire confidence. So what are the specifications under the policy? By specific details about the requirements it is creating. For example, employees are expected to dress business attire Monday through Thursday, and on Friday can wear casual attire unless clients are on site or they have business meetings. It's very specific. And then implementation, which parties are required to carry out the policy. For example, managers will exercise discretion in determining appropriateness of appearance. And I want to use that example because a lot of policies will say, no flip-flops, no bras showing, no spaghetti straps, no whatever. Well, it's hard to be exhaustive on that kind of thing. It's better to say, the manager has the discretion to say, you are not dressed for this environment. You need to go home and change and come back, right? I spent more time talking about dress codes than I ever care to talk about. It's just insane. But people will come to work in PJ bottoms, like, whoa. But, so what is the effective date of the policy? And also if you, maybe you need a glossary, how do you define business casual attire? Business casual is appropriate for a business meeting, but not the beach or something, you know, in general. Okay, all right, I also want to talk about handbooks versus policy manuals. And the reason I want to cover this is that some organizations think that a handbook is the entire exhaustive list of policies with all the forms and everything attached, including your performance management process, like your review process. They'll have, these are the dates of the reviews, these are the forms that we're going to use and all that. And they call it an employee handbook. And that's not an employee handbook. That is a policy and procedures manual. So an employee handbook, the audience is really the employees. Those are the intended recipients. For a policies and procedures manual, managers and supervisors are the ones that those are written for. So a handbook is an easy reference, easy to use, easy to read. A policies and procedures manual is a very comprehensive document. Handbook familiarizes employees with basics of compensation and benefits, whereas policies and procedure manual covers every aspect of policies and procedures, including form. So if you put a form, a review form in a handbook, and you change your review form, which a lot of companies do that quite frequently, then your handbook's out of date. So don't put anything like that in there that you know you're going to change. All right, employees, the handbook educates employees on their responsibilities, where a policies and procedure manual serves as backup when more information is needed. And you may even want to like cite references for the managers and supervisors. Why is this law in place? Give them a little bit of education. We were talking about this earlier when people take over as supervisors. You're like, here's a magic wand, bam, you're a supervisor, go do your job, right? Well, that's so not fair. I mean, how in the world, as a civilian, do I go in and understand COBRA? How do I even know what the Americans with Disabilities Act is? I mean, the average person can't tell you that. Well, you're taking this person who's now just been an employee doing their job. You're now in charge of all these people. And by the way, you're obligated to tell them about their rights. And I don't know what those are. So this is a reference for them. So, I mean, not every organization has a policies and procedures manual. It's a really good thing to have for supervisors. So it helps ensure consistency. It helps with training if you don't have time or bandwidth to train them. And if you do, that's awesome because so many organizations don't. And this is an augmentation to it if you do that. It's really, really helpful no matter who's in place as a supervisor. Okay. So how to create a handbook. Here's some steps. First of all, review all your current policies and make revisions as needed. This is a good one for you because you're going through, right? It serves as the foundation for your handbook. Are there any practices that you need policies for? And are all federal, state, local requirements they included? Okay, avoid overly broad confidentiality and employee conduct rules in the handbook. Like I said earlier, make sure you look for those kinds of things. Like, are we restricting employees' rights or we shouldn't? Include the following: the mission statement, vision, values, and always equal employment opportunity statement. The contractual disclaimer that says this is not an employment contract, employment is at will. Make sure you include the purpose of the handbook and the background information on the organization. and summarize each policy because this is a high-level explanation of the policies. It's easy to read and written so that employees understand it. I would actually have somebody on your staff, because you probably know so much more than anybody else on your staff. Sometimes you want to make sure somebody understands it. I would have somebody on my team to read this and tell me if it makes sense to you. Because you know so much more, right? Review and update the entire handbook. Then I would recommend providing it to an employment attorney for review. There are employment attorneys who specialize in nonprofits, so they're not exorbitantly expensive. If they wrote the handbook, it would be. Then use the internet to email it or post it electronically if you have an internet site or SharePoint or something like that. And make sure that physical copies are available to people who don't have access to get this. Then have them sign an acknowledgement of the receipt of handbook. This is so important. Like, I know I've said it over and over, but so many times I've had issues because of this. So ideally you have this electronically for your own ease. You store the acknowledgement in the employee's HR file. I recommend signing a point person, if that's you or somebody else. Just monitor legislative changes. Like the chamber has really good updated information when laws change. If you're a member of Society for Human Resource Management, that is a really great resource to stay on top of changes in employment law. Just monitor what's going on. And then if you do change your handbook, you do need a new acknowledgement. So whatever the latest, let's say you changed your safety manual, whatever you're changing it, make sure you sign it after the new update is available. And then again, have legal review it periodically. I've also been in this situation, so I wanted to share this. What if an employee refuses to sign the handbook? I'm not signing this. And this goes the same for like performance reviews that they don't like, same kind of thing. So ask the employee to write, I refuse to sign. Because then you've got their own handwriting that refuse to sign something if they don't realize that what you're doing, right? Or if they don't do that, have an employee representative write employee refused to sign acknowledgement and have a representative and a witness sign it, if that's the case. Or lastly, you can make signing the handbook condition of employment. If they don't sign the handbook, then they don't work there. Well, that seems kind of draconian, right? Well, that already tells you that employee is going to be a problem for you right there, right? Yeah, and so you may want to just take that time. Any questions on anything that I just covered? I'm going to go in a little bit more depth on the sections of the handbook. And the reason why I'm doing this is you'll get the presentation, so I want you to be able to have this. Okay, so the first is a welcome message. I always like to see the first opener from your CEO, your executive director, your board chairman, whoever you want the message to come from. Just welcome them to the organization and thank employees who have been there, right? Make sure you show your appreciation for them joining your wonderful organization and look forward to working with them and have them their signature, even if it's electronic, have it on there. Believe it or not, employees do look at that. Then it's the foundation section. What are your missions, vision, your values? Your equal opportunity statement is a foundation. Your contractual disclaimer and at-will statement. And I say we're allowed because like in Wisconsin, it's not. And what is the purpose of the handbook? That's section 2. And then section 3, all your policies and procedures. You may have more than these, but I just wanted to include these in case you don't have anything like this in your handbook that you might want to add it. Attendance, timekeeping, meals and rest periods, hours of work, how do you transfer jobs, termination, social media, performance, and harassment. Safety, again, we talked about our safety manual. Violence in the workplace, use of company property, drugs and alcohol, Americans with Disabilities Act and ADA Amendments Act, Family Medical Leave Act, and any other legal protections like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Everybody knows that if it's a pregnant person, when she has her baby, you have to require to provide her a place to lactate. So that is a policy that you need in your handbook, and you need to give her the time to do it. So you want to make sure those kinds of things are in there. Then your benefits, okay? And I want to be prescriptive about this because this is really important that you get this right so that people understand it. How is vacation accrued? How is it used? Is it used in hours or days? Is it used in a half day? How is it carried over from year to year? If it is, how much? How's it requested? How far in advance do you have to request it? What if there's an emergency situation, they need to take time off? How is that different? So all of those things need to be outlined. For holidays, which days do they need to work the day before and the day after to get paid the holiday? That's always a point of contention right there. Well, I already had vacation scheduled and I didn't work the day after, before and after because of that. Personal days, if you also have those, how are they accrued? How are they requested? How are they used? And are they carried over? Leave, there's all kinds of leave, sick leave, jury duty leave, bereavement leave, military leave. All right, so if somebody's in that situation, what do they need to do? What documentation do you require? Some companies require proof that you went to a funeral, which I think is pretty horrible, but some companies do. And if you do, it needs to be in your handbook. And if you do, you need to get it from everybody. Like usually it's for bulletin or something. Do you provide tuition assistance? This is an area where I've seen a lot of issues. When are you eligible? How do you apply? What's your grades requirement in order to get the money? And if you leave before your payment agreement is over, what happens? So if you have a tuition assistance policy, that's really important to outline all the details. Other benefits, do they have any type of call-in pay or report to duty pay? Cover all your health and welfare benefits in general, retirement benefits, any mental health resources, service awards should be, that's a benefit. So I always like to put that in the handbook. And then you need to say, we have workers' compensation that covers employees in the event of a workplace injury or illness. Then procedures is separate, high level here. What is your progressive discipline if you have it? How do you do performance reviews? Are they done once a year? Are they done twice a year? What does that look like? Not the forms. When are people, how often are wages increased? Or do you give bonuses? Don't guarantee it in your handbook, but just say every year we're going to evaluate whether or not we'll give a bonus. If you give merit increases, when are they done? How are they determined? How are shifts scheduled? If you want to swap a shift with somebody, if you have shifts, how do you do that? What are emergency procedures? How do you evacuate the building if you need to? And what is your exit process? Do you ask people to participate in an exit interview?
What's the merit increases?
It's just increases for, every year, like we're gonna give up to 5% increase depending on what score you get on this review. Yeah,
Different from a bonus.
bonus is usually like a year-end thing. Usually most people get the same thing. Okay, and then the last section is the important summary and acknowledgement section. Reinforce the important, and the handouts, you're gonna get an example of an acknowledgement because I wanted to make sure, and it can be quite long. Let's see, this is the acknowledgement. Okay, this is your legal protection here, employee acknowledgement, and it says on the back, to be placed in employee's HR file. So it basically says, this is not an employment contract, employment is at will, that we have a right as the organization to change policies when we deem it necessary, and we'll educate you on when we change policies. So it takes away any argument that people have that's an employment contract. Other topics you might want to cover, and these are things that I've seen needed at other nonprofits that I work for. One is employee classification. We talked about independent contractors, right? So define what is an exempt employee, what is a non-exempt, how many hours do you have to work to be a full-time employee versus a temporary? Right? You have seasonal workers, and if so, how does that work? You have interns. What are all the employee classifications that you have? What is the pay schedule? How frequently are they paid? What is the work week? Does it start on a Monday? Does it start on a Sunday? What are the deductions we can make? If you have uniform allowance, tool allowance, we're allowed to deduct those. Whatever, if you have any deductions like that. The employees have access to HR files. This is often a red flag when people say, I want to see my HR file. right? We have always had a policy everywhere I worked. You have access to see it, but you can't make a copy out of it. Once it is in the custody of the employer, it's our property now. So we don't give you a copy of it. Once it's in the file, yes, I give them a copy of their reviews, but after that, it's now the employee's the employer's property. So employment of relatives, this is a big one, often. So if you do allow employment of relatives, you don't want them reporting to each other if you can avoid that. So you might want to put a statement in there. You do not have direct control over that person if you're related to them. So solicitation, a lot of companies have organizations, non-solicitation policies. You're not allowed to come into the workplace and sell things. That's often a private industry thing too, because if you allow Girl Scout cookies, you allow a lot of things to be sold. A union can say, that is solicitation. I have the right to talk to your employees because that is solicitation also, which you don't want union people talking to your employees, generally, right? You don't want that. So anyway, it's up to your organization whether you want to allow solicitation. So upon separation of employment, what happens? This is often a point of contention because people are like, well, I've got 3 weeks of vacation. I want to get paid out. Well, my handbook says you must give 2 weeks of notice in order to get your vacation paid out. And you can only get paid out up to 40 hours. Or my handbook says once you give notice of termination, you are not paid out your vacation. So it needs to be crystal clear in your handbook what you're doing, because that is often a really contentious situation.
Is there a legal issue with not paying out vacation because
Some
they've earned
states,
it?
yeah, some states, that it's actual a vested right. I don't think Florida's one of those states. The right thing to do, obviously, in my personal opinion, is to pay it out, right? Regardless, but
We don't, and our managers tell people they're paid out, so then we end up paying it out.
right, and then think about, what if you don't pay out somebody and you pay out these other.
Exactly, we've
You
done
know?
that.
Yeah, so, and those people talk, right? Sometimes after they were friends or whatever, then that's creating an issue for you. Whatever you're gonna do, do it consistently. Also, if you're gonna pre-employment test, you need to put that in your handbook. If you're gonna have people go take a pre-employment drug test, or you're gonna have a pre-employment post-offer physical, that needs to be stated in your handbook. It is required in Florida that you state the organization is a smoke-free workplace. That's unique to Florida. A lot of states don't have that requirement. Workplace violence prevention, commitment to workplace safety, and cell phone safety in driving. This one's really important, and I'll tell you, I was involved in an issue with this. If an employee is working for you, let's say you sent them to a conference. They're driving on behalf of your organization and they're talking on the cell phone and they get in an accident, right? Well, you're also liable to be sued in addition to the employee for damages, but you need to say in your handbook, no talking on the cell phone when they're driving, right? That should be stated in your handbook. Talk now about some Florida specific things. So first of all, there is a Florida Civil Rights Act. It applies to employers of 15 or more. This says that obviously there's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which provides basic protections, but they also added pregnancy and related conditions, perceived to have HIV or AIDS or sickle cell trait. So that is something that should be covered in your handbook. Equal pay, they actually have an Equal Pay Act in Florida, which was kind of surprising to me. No offense, but I was like, what? So it prohibits discrimination based on sex for jobs that are substantially similar. And the reason I say that is nationally, they have so many issues passing this. It covers employers with 2 or more employees and allows differentiation in pay for the following reasons: seniority, merit-based pay, like somebody's doing better than somebody else. Standards measured by quantity or quality. Otherwise, if it's a substantially similar job, male and female should be paid the same. All genders should be paid the same. Right. Whistleblower protections. It protects employees who report violations or suspected violations to any government agency. So that is a protection that should be in your handbook. And then recruiting and hiring. So if you are going to do a background check on somebody, it requires that they sign a document that states that they agree to allow you to do that. And you may in Florida conduct pre-employment drug and alcohol testing, but it's not required. But if you do it, you must provide them your policy that states if they don't pass, or there's all kinds of things that could happen when you go have drug tests. You could have a negative dilute, which means they couldn't get enough of a sample and then you got to retest. So you just need to have a written policy on that if you do it. And in Florida, if you want to apply for different kinds of workers' comp discounts, there are requirements related to drug testing to receive those. And E-Verify is required of all private employers and all government agencies within 3 days of hire. And a private employer is defined as a person or entity that transacts business in the state, has a license issued by any agency, and has employees perform labor or services in the state in exchange for pay. And then, again, if you're gonna withhold deductions for some reason, you need to have that outlined. Again, you obviously have to follow the minimum wage requirements. And interestingly, in Florida, they also have a COBRA Act that applies to employers of less than 20 people. So, in a lot of states, that's not the case. So, yeah, in addition to, if you have 20 or more, you're required to offer COBRA when somebody's employment ends, provided you offer them benefits in the beginning, right? And here it's less than 20 is required. Also, health and safety wise, they do have that Clean Indoor Air Act, which requires that it's a smoke-free workplace. And also, as a point of interest, there's weapons in the workplace law that says employees are allowed to have weapons in their vehicle in an employer parking lot. So, that's not all states. And also, safe driving prohibits texting while driving. There's an act about that in Florida. All right, so in closing, train for consistency. This is a really, I think this is so important. Include handbook training in your orientation or onboarding, you know. I would assess for understanding. This is what I would do. I don't grade quizzes that I do in onboarding or orientation, but I do have people talk about their answers and why they think they are. I pick out a few really important policies and I make up a little quiz and I say, what do you think the answer to this is? And I have people talk about it. Doesn't take that long, but it just assesses how much they're grasping it. Include handbook training and all supervisor training, any kind of refresher annual training you do for supervisors as a reminder. And it just ensures that what people are actually doing is what the policy says. I have been in so many HR situations because supervisors did not understand the policies. And so just like they were telling people about the vacation, right? They do that. They commit the company, like, we're going to pay you out your vacation. Well, that's not a policy. Like, technically you could say that's not the policy, right? But then you got to dispute with the employees and put you in a hard spot. So just make sure the supervisors truly understand the handbook and follow it. And review it regularly. Like I said, there's always litigation. There's always employment law changes. And just like law changes it, so does interpretation under employment law cases. And most experts recommend a thorough review once a year. So it sounds like a lot of work. I know it does. Really, it's not. It's just thinking through, what does my organization require and do I have it in writing? It does take some attention. They can't just write your handbook and put it on the shelf. You really need to look at it periodically. And the good thing is once you have it, you're going to have a more fair workplace for everybody. You're going to have supervisors who are doing a better job for you. If you're in HR, it's going to make your life a lot easier because you're not going to have to be in these really difficult situations because people didn't understand. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions for this?
Can you use this as the basis for the independent contractor handbook?
Oh, yeah,
Is it
for
completely
sure.
different, man? Okay.
Absolutely. We
Okay.
took their handbook and we tweaked it for the independent contractor and we put on the title Handbook for Independent Contractors. Yeah.
So we're not starting from scratch. Okay.
No. Just they have some different things, right? Not a lot, but they have some different things. Yeah, they should. Otherwise, they should be employees,
Right.
right?
And then the handbook, would you hand that to an intern? Because an intern is considered employee. or
Yeah.
no? Interns should get it too? Okay.
Yeah, because if you're gonna, you could terminate them, right? They're an employee, you could terminate them under the rules in the handbook. Yeah. I've seen it before. I've seen
And I
it,
ask especially because of the dress code.
yes.
It's, you know, Florida shorts versus regular shorts, and then some people think, so I like that. I can refer back to it and say, wait, yeah, wait.
Yeah, we're not paying you to go home and change, just go home and change and come back, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, all right, so I just want to remind you, I do run Keep HR LLC. If you're ever in need of, I do HR compliance audits. I look at everything. How do you do things? Do you have job descriptions that are accurate and up to date? That's really important. I do benefits education and design for employees because I really think that's an underutilized asset that you have as an organization, is make sure people understand what the value is of staying at your organization. And then I do supervisor leadership development. Again, I'm very passionate about that. I think it is so unfair to people to put them in a supervisor role and give them no tools. Because you're asking them to fail, in my opinion. So I do succession planning. I think that's a really big thing in nonprofits. I've seen this be such a pain point for people that somebody suddenly leaves and there's nobody even close to taking their role. Not even, you would never want some of these people in that role. And it takes months and months and months to find somebody, and then the organization suffers. So it's better to be thinking about that all along. And then I do also help with HR projects, like if you want a new HR system, which HR system would work for you, that kind of thing. You want a new handbook, I can write your handbook, that kind of thing. And that's my contact information. If you think of anything after, like I wish I'd asked this, that's my email, that's my cell phone. I'm happy to talk to you. I know it's a lot of information. And again, you'll get the presentation. There's two handouts. There's one that's the employee acknowledgement example, and then there's a recommended list of policies for your. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. Anything else? Thanks so much. We learned something